Miguel de Cervantes, the author of Don Quixote, wrote that liberty is one of the choicest gifts that heaven hath bestowed upon man, and exceeds in volume all the treasures which the earth contains within its bosom or the sea covers. Liberty, as well as honor, man ought to preserve at the hazard of his life, for without it, life is insupportable. This is Don Quixote de la Mancha. And today we are honored to interview someone who has devoted 30 years to working to promote human flourishing and freer, more humane societies. You know, over 30 years ago, right?
Over 31
years ago, Kris Mauren joined Father Robert Sirico in the adventure of founding the Acton Institute for the Study of Religion and Liberty. And it's an international educational and public policy organization that is based in Grand Rapids, Michigan, with also offices in Argentina and Italy, in Rome. Kris was born in Seattle. He's the youngest of 8 children. And he obtained a degree in economics and international relations from Johns Hopkins University. Kris is well known as a leader in the nonprofit governance and received awards to that effect. Moreover, he regularly shares his knowledge on topics such as management, measurement, and evaluation, and fundraising. Kris serves as director or as an advisory board member to a number of institutions, including Donors Capital Fund, Foundation for Economic Education, the John Templeton Foundation, Templeton World Charity Foundation, and Templeton Religion and Trust, and Excel Charter Academy. Kris is active in a number of community organizations, including the Economics Club of Grand Rapids, the Rotary International, and the Philadelphia Society. So it is such an honor to have you.
It's my honor to be here.
The first question is, how did you meet Father Robert Sirico? And how did you come up with the idea of establishing the Acton Institute?
Okay. Well, I was a freshman, my first year at the university at Johns Hopkins. I was studying economics, and I was involved in the Newman Club on campus, the Catholic student organization. And one day we had a charismatic seminarian come to visit and speak to our Newman Club on campus, and that happened to be Robert Sirico, and he wasn't yet ordained a priest. But he had an interesting journey. He had been on the left and away from his faith, and then some people had seen him as being very intelligent and capable, but so wrong on economics that they set out to sort of convert him to sound economics. And they gave him books. They gave him Hayek and Mises and Bastiat, and he had an intellectual conversion and then a return to his faith, and then entered seminary. So that brings us up to when I met him. He came and spoke to our club of young Catholics, and when he learned I was studying economics, he immediately asked me if I knew Hayek or Mises, and I was ashamed that I didn't know them. So he set about fixing me. But, we had lots of conversations in those days about the importance of bringing religion and liberty together. And here I was, sort of the economist, and he was the theologian. And we thought, what a pity that so many people who speak on behalf of religion are so ignorant, frankly, on basic economics. And what they tended to do was lend their moral authority to bad economics, which of course has bad outcomes for people that religion cares about, that Christians care about. And also remember, this moment, this was 85, was almost the height of liberation theology across this hemisphere, especially the Southern Hemisphere. And in a very real way, we were inspired by the bad ideas of liberation theology to try to create a corrective. So we informally had these conversations. For sure, while I was a student, we didn't anticipate creating an institution. We were just fighting for these ideas together in proto-Acton ways, to be honest. So that's how we met. And Acton began 5 years after we met.
In 1990.
He had been ordained a priest and was assigned to Grand Rapids. And I had set out on a career hoping to use my Mandarin. I'd learned Mandarin in college and had lived and worked in China briefly. and I wanted to return, but the job I was offered and took was put on hold after Tiananmen Square 3 weeks after I took the job. So I ended up living in Hawaii for a period of time, a year, and Father came to visit me, because your friends come out of the woodwork to visit you when you live in Hawaii. And he came to talk to me, and we rekindled those ideas about the importance of combining and connecting religion and liberty together. But he was a full-time, pastor, and I had a job, even though it wasn't exactly what I wanted to do. But we talked about maybe trying this idea. And at some point, he invited me to move to Grand Rapids and begin the work. So I did. In April of 1990, I moved to Grand Rapids, Michigan, and just started writing mission statements and starting from scratch. And that was the beginning of our work.
I met Father Sirico more or less at the same time, because I was working in Washington and he was still a seminarian. So he often jokes that I was the first Guatemalan he met. And then he came down to Guatemala in 1990.
Exactly. So
for the Mont Pelerin Society
I should have mentioned
meeting.
this, especially being here in Guatemala. It's terrible of me. So really, Guatemala was the birthplace of Acton Institute. And it was precisely that visit in January of 90 at the Mont Pelerin meeting.
At the Mont Pelerin meeting.
In Antigua.
Yes, in Antigua.
And Father had been talking to many people there, but most notably Alejandro Chafuen, who at the time was with the Atlas Foundation, whose job it was precisely to help start new institutions. Father claims he was naive and didn't know that, and had told Alex that he had this vision, or needed help anyway, to be a better articulator, to be able to answer more invitations to speak and write, and he needed a research assistant. And Alex said, no, you're thinking way too small. You need a whole institution to carry these ideas forward. So I think it was shortly after that he came to visit me in Hawaii. So he actually had this idea already percolating in his mind, thanks to Guatemala in January of 1990.
When you mentioned liberation theology and how many people of faith believe that they have to be socialist in a way to be faithful.
Sure.
So how do you go about, or how did you go about in the beginning, or what are the biggest challenges of talking about liberty to people of faith?
Sure. Well, the good news is most people who ascribe to some of those ideas didn't do so out of ideology. They weren't hard Marxists. They wanted to be faithful, right? And they wanted to achieve the ends that sounded so lovely from Marxism, to raise the poor and the rest. So we had to be careful to distinguish people who were winnable, people of goodwill who weren't hard Marxists, from the hard Marxists, and there were many of those, as you know, who weren't willing to openly engage these ideas. Many of the people who were committed to liberation theology captured the institutions. So they held the seminaries, they held many of the Catholic colleges, and at the beginning of Acton, we feared that we wouldn't be able to reach the audiences we needed to, because they were, again, held by the hard left. So we started immediately just going around the institutions, and we worked with what we called future religious leaders. So we immediately reached out to young seminarians and young priests and nuns. And by the way, we're not a Catholic organization, so we brought in people of different faith traditions to help engage this dialogue between liberty and religion from their perspectives. Here in Guatemala, so I should mention, Inez Ayao was one of our very first students at our very first student conference in 1991, among the religious leaders we gathered in Michigan for one of our first conferences.
So then there's the other side of the coin, where businessmen sometimes feel guilty about generating a profit and feel that what they're doing day to day is probably not compatible with their faith beliefs. How do you persuade business people that what they do can be good in God's eyes?
Sure. Well, that's a tragedy that for so long business people have been made to feel immoral for the good that they are doing. So part of our work from the beginning, on the one hand, was to work for religious leaders to help them have a better appreciation for economics. And the other hand was to work with business leaders who are the practitioners, as it were, of economics, to help them understand the essential nature of what they're doing, the important role that they have, and then partly to affirm them, but also to challenge them authentically about how to use their gifts and talents and opportunities as business leaders in a better way. And so often, business leaders are not challenged; they're insulted. Mm-hmm. Right? They go to church on Sunday, and if there's a religious pastor who doesn't understand their world, doesn't understand basic economics, and they make critiques, it's an insult. Because they don't know deeply enough the role of the business person. So, in my view, business people generally know that what they're doing is good. They look around and they see the jobs they're providing. They look around and they see the goods and services that they're able to create for people that want and need them. So there's a good that's obvious about what they're doing. And we force them into this cognitive dissonance, which does a couple things. One, it drives them from the faith, because they might conclude that I'm irreparably immoral because I'm a business person, and they simply leave. Or they compartmentalize their faith. So Sunday, they go to church and take their lumps, as we say, and the rest of the time, they're a greedy, capricious capitalist, because why not, right? Nothing's going to constrain me. I'm bad anyway. So both of those are terrible. What we need is business people to understand their central role, and then to be called to make better choices, because business is, in a way, morally dependent on the decisions and actions of those who lead it. Right? So business leaders can choose to create objectively immoral goods, and might have a very successful business, but they should be authentically challenged when they pursue those ends. Right? On the other hand, if they're working to produce clean water for the citizens of their country, that's the kind of thing that they should be affirmed for rather than condemned if they make a profit. A profit means they're doing it well and efficiently and serving more and more people. So I think it's very important for us to make these distinctions, both to make sure the religious leaders understand it, but business leaders can understand it as well, so they can be affirmed and challenged at the same time.
You just reminded me of Dr. Manuel Ayau, who always talked about teaching economics also to businessmen, not only to religious leaders, but also to businessmen, because there's something counterintuitive about economics.
Yes. So
that sort of leads into the next question, which is about Acton's work. How do you go about doing this? You have publications, you have seminars, you have a media outlet.
Sure.
You produce quite high quality videos. How did you decide what you were going to do as a research center?
Sure. Well, we were very aware when we were beginning Acton Institute that we need a theory of change. We needed to understand the logic of what we're trying to accomplish and then ultimately try to measure against that. And we were both taken by Friedrich Hayek's little monograph called The Intellectuals and Socialism, which was an account for how it was that intellectuals were able to sort of win the day and take the institutions in a socialist direction. So we studied that and decided to take those lessons and apply them in the opposite direction. So we were very clear that we needed to get to the second-handers of ideas, second-hand dealers of ideas, people like the pastors, for example, and teachers. And so we set out to, one, make sure we had the right ideas through research. And as you know, we have a research department. Dr. Sam Gregg, of course, a terrific scholar, is the head of that. And they produce many books a year, as many as a dozen books a year, and then sometimes in multiple languages. And then we take those big ideas and we distill them into educational programs. We do, pre-COVID, as many as 20 leadership formation programs annually for business leaders, for religious leaders, for human service providers, people who work direct service to the poor, a number of different leadership constituencies we bring together and help them understand this worldview of combining religion and liberty. And then finally, as you noted, we have a media department, and sometime, I think 12 or 13 years ago, in response to so many people who had been through our leadership formation programs, they said, "This is wonderful, now what? What do I do? And make it easy for me." So we thought film might be one of those new opportunities to be able to take the ideas and equip religious leaders and teachers to take them right to their spheres of influence. You can plug in a short video that sets up an important question and then use it to draw a conversation among your students. So we decided that's one of the ways that we would equip our people. We've also produced long-form documentaries, as you know, and those have been very successful as well in reaching a very broad audience. So for example, Poverty Inc., which is our newest documentary, but quite old by documentary standards. I think it's 8 years old now. Continues to get rave reviews. I mean, on a weekly basis, I get one or two emails or letters from people who tell us they've discovered it and are using it. Literally, I think 3 months ago, we had an all-staff meeting, which we try to do once a month. And I was encouraging the staff with, upcoming programs and the good work we'd done recently. And that day I'd received 2 compliments about Acton's Poverty Inc. film. One was from someone in Texas who told me, I hadn't known this, that Poverty Inc. is part of the curriculum for the Green Berets.
Oh, wow.
It was astonishing. We would have never thought of that or expected it. And another was from a professor at the University of Calgary in Canada, who told us he had used it for his first year MBA students, and he had never in 30 years of education had such an animated conversation among the students. So he just had to write us and give us that compliment. So I'm really pleased that some of our products have been so effective and been able to touch people's lives and get them thinking in these important ways, and 7 or 8 years later still doing that good work.
We use Poverty Cure, and we have been presenting Poverty Cure and Poverty Inc. to the armed forces in Guatemala for 5 years. So yes,
I had not known
it's
that.
very, very good material. So the Acton Institute has grown immensely from its beginning. Right now, you handle an organization with more than 50 employees, or probably more than that, and a budget in the millions. How do you do that?
Well, the truthful answer is we're making it up as we go along. But I've been doing it now for 30 years, so we've built systems, of course, and none of it is our doing. We're just bringing bright, clever people together, hopefully smarter than I am, to lead different aspects of the work. So that's the big secret, is you hire people smarter than you are, which in my case is easy to do. For you, it would be very hard, Carol, but for me, it's easy. So it's trying to build a team and a culture and trying to keep everyone moving in the same direction, and staying true to your values.
One of the things that I find really valuable of the Acton Institute is that you've always been interested in global issues. It's not just US-centered, and in terms of Latin America, you've produced a lot of research on issues that are very important to this region, on crony capitalism, populism, liberation theology, and poverty. These are concerns that are very important to us. And so now you have Acton Argentina. So how do you see the region? And how important is Latin America, I think, to to Acton Institute?
Well, when Father and I began, we just simply assumed our work would be global. I mean, it was not even much of a conversation. Both of us just had this passion that our concerns were global concerns. The church, he and I are both Catholic, so obviously our faith experience and reference was a global church in literally every hamlet in the world. So from our perspective, for us to do our work, to bring together religion and liberty by teaching religious leaders, we needed to be global. It was just without question. And Latin America has always had a very special place in our heart. And Father's traveled down here any number of times. In the very early years of our work, he was down here. And as I mentioned, it all began here in Guatemala. So I do think that there'll be more interesting things for us to do in this hemisphere, probably than in the American hemisphere, the North American hemisphere for a while, because there's such difficulties that we're having, epistemologically even, in the United States, that we're struggling to see how we break through. And you don't quite have those same problems yet. We hope we don't export them to you. But I think it'll be easier for us to add value outside the U.S. for a while. We're not giving up on the U.S., of course, but no, the global concerns have always been part of our work. Latin America is a very special place. Unfortunately, I don't speak Spanish, but I do very much want to make Latin America a core part of our work going forward as well.
That sort of leads into the next question, which is 2020 was a very difficult year. And I think not just because of the pandemic, but because of the rise in government controls and surveillance and sort of loss of freedom in general. Right. The epistemological problems that you alluded to. So are these signs of the times? How do you see our near future evolving? What are the challenges that people who love freedom will face?
Sure. It's a very difficult time because government has advanced dramatically through this crisis in ways we wouldn't have imagined. Contract tracing, kinds of invasive tests and requirements just to go about our daily lives now are things we wouldn't have imagined possible in the United States, certainly, and I'm sure for you here as well. And as we know, the history of freedom and government, crises are a great opportunity for government to grow, and it never fully recedes. Mm-hmm. So that's, I think, a realistic, pessimistic way to look at it, that our job is going to be much more difficult because they've taken over more ground, the statists, and we are going to have to work harder and harder. I remind myself of the insight, famous quote of one of our founders in America, that the price of liberty is eternal vigilance, which suggests to us that we're never going to win, right? It's never over at some point. We have to constantly be fighting the natural urge to control others. And government is the ideal way to sort of control people. And people love to seek power and do that. And of course, we haven't mentioned it yet, but Lord Acton, for whom we're named, had that very good insight about power, that power does indeed tend to corrupt, and absolute power, when you hold the reins of government, it does corrupt absolutely. And so we're right to be suspicious of any growth of government. And sometimes they're very good people, but government has its own logic, which inevitably moves in directions that are counter to freedom, individual freedom.
Yeah. Hopefully Lord Acton was right about humanity evolving towards freedom and sort of a gradual evolution towards freedom.
But it's not going to be perfectly linear.
No.
We're going to have these retreats along the way for sure.
do you have some last words of advice for Instituto Fe y Libertad and the work we do?
Well, we feel such kinship with you at Acton because when we look at the panoply of movement institutions and think tanks working broadly for the free society, there are very, very few, and you and I are among that small set, who hold in tension the freedom part with morality. And we know that freedom is essential for the good society, but not sufficient. And so our particular work, your work here at Fe y Libertad and Acton's work, I think are the most important voices in the freedom movement. I don't mean that necessarily as a criticism of others, but because they have it half right. But a society that honors all religion and no liberty is not the society we want to live in. You might think of totalitarian religious states, Saudi Arabia or something. I mean, it's not something that honors human freedom, or the bad days when Christian traditions controlled the state and persecuted people. I mean, we're certainly not advocating that, which is sometimes a dumb criticism people give. But on the other hand, freedom by itself is not enough. And we know that all of us want to live next door to good neighbors. All of us want to know that if we leave our cell phone on a table and leave the room, that someone will pick it up and earnestly look for us, right? Even if they could take it with impunity. I mean, these are values of morality that must be combined with liberty. And for us to realize the good society, we need to combine religion and liberty. So I'm so grateful to what you are doing here, because you have it exactly right, if I may say that. And we hope that you guys have great success here in Guatemala and throughout the hemisphere.
Well, we were born inspired by the Acton Institute, so it's great that we can interview you and find out more about how you started. And we definitely consider Acton Institute a parent institution. And so for more information regarding Instituto Fe y Libertad, its work, activities, and what we discussed in this episode, you can visit www.feylibertad.org. Our sites on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, or YouTube channel. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you so much, Kris.
Thank you. My pleasure.